Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me here on Untold Evidence. Today we are in our reaction series, episode 2 of the Jeremy Corbell on American Alchemy. In the last episode, if you didn't catch it, we talked about the whistleblowers, the people who came forward, what they risked, and the one who sadly died before he could speak. This time we go a little darker on that side of the conversation, because Corbell doesn't just talk about brave people stepping into the light. He talks about what he says was done to them once they did. The discrediting, the fabricated evidence, the alleged attempt to turn whistleblowers into criminals. The machine that he claims went to work on the messengers. And I want to be straight here before we start. This is the part of the story where the claims get serious and where real, named people and agencies get accused of real crimes. So we're going to be extra careful. Every accusation gets attributed to the person making it. Nothing gets stated as fact unless there actually is one. And every single claim goes into one of our 3 boxes: Tier 1 documented, Tier 2 contested, and Tier 3 speculation. But here's why I'm not going to wave any of it away and why I'm going to keep open-minded. Because we have covered it on this channel before with declassified government documents, a program that did exactly this kind of thing. It was called COINTELPRO, and it was real. So when everyone says the state went after inconvenient people by smearing them, fabricating evidence and trying to destroy their lives, my answer can't be that's impossible, because we have the paperwork proving it's not only possible, it's happened. The question is never whether this playbook exists. We know it does. The question is whether it was run in these specific cases. And that is where the tiers will let us tell the story. So let's go. Let's start with Dylan Borland. And let's start where the solid ground is, because that's where more of it is than you'd probably expect. Tier 1, the documented. Dylan Borland is real. He's a former United States Air Force intelligence specialist. He worked in geospatial intelligence, the analysis of imagery and radar from 2010 to 2013, and later worked as a senior analyst for defense contractors. In September 2025, he sat in front of the House Oversight Committee and testified under oath in public for the first time. That happened and it's on the record. You can go and watch it. And what did he testify to? He described an encounter at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia back in 2012. He said he watched a roughly 100-foot equilateral triangle craft near a NASA hangar lift off and fly. He described 4 lights, one at each corner and a larger one in the center. He described the surface as a black metallic with something like gold lava or plasma flowing over it, a fluid moving skin. He said it made no sound, that it interfered with his phone, and that it left him feeling static electricity all over his body, smelling something like the air after a thunderstorm. And he said that after he reported it, his career was deliberately broken, that for over a decade, agencies blocked his clearance, delayed him, and ultimately removed his ability to work in the field at all. And there's one small detail in here that Corbell lights up about, because he says he's heard it again and again, that gold undulating liquid surface. He says engineers, people who hate not having the right words for things, have described that exact same flowing golden hue to him over and over across cases that have nothing to do with each other. Now, that's Corbell's claim about a pattern in private accounts, so it has to be Tier 2 for now. But it's an interesting kind of detail because it's oddly specific and oddly consistent. And it's not the sort of thing that a copycat would necessarily land on. File it under contested for now, but I think we've got to file it. Corbell also floats a theory about what Borland might have actually seen, and it's worth hearing because it's not the obvious one. He doesn't assume it's aliens flying it. He suggests instead that it might even be ours. He goes as far as saying that the United States may have managed to take a genuinely non-human power source and bolt it into a craft we built ourselves. And his image for it is kind of perfect. He says it'd be like putting a Ferrari engine into a cheap little runaround. The power's real, but the body just can't handle it, so it barely works. That's the breakaway civilization idea again, that the notion we've made crude, derivative technology out of something we found. It's a fascinating hypothesis. It's also pure tier 3 for now, an interpretation but with no real hard evidence behind it. But I think it is worth noting that he reaches for the human explanation before the alien one. There's more discipline than the most of this field manages. Now let's tier it cleanly because it does matter. The fact that it was testified under oath to all of this is tier 1. Documented, that's not in dispute. That the craft he described was real, a non-human object, that's tier 3. Because here's the honest distinction, the same one we drew with every witness last time. Sworn testimony that you saw something is powerful, but it is not the same as something being verified. Borland is by every account a credible man describing a real experience as he remembers it, but a description, however vivid, however sincere, is still testimony. No triangle has been put on the table, so the encounter itself, the craft, frustratingly has to sit in tier 3, not mocked or dismissed, but it's just not been independently confirmed. And then the reprisals, the broken career, that sits somewhere between tier 1 and tier 2. Because the fact that he says it happened under oath is documented, and the pattern is real. We'll come back to that. But the specific claim that agencies deliberately, maliciously destroyed his career, as opposed to the bureaucratic dysfunction or coincidence, is the kind of thing that's generally hard to prove from the outside. So I'd say the reprisals are contested, serious, sworn and plausible, but not fully nailed down. We know the government does these type of tactics, and it is incredibly hard to prove. So whether you believe it or not, that is your choice. But I do think the evidence should still be put into these tiers. Now here's where it gets really dark, and we have to be careful, because this is Corbell's account, not Borland's sworn testimony, and the difference is going to matter enormously. Corbell claims that an official from a specific intelligence office came to him and told him things about Borland's secret testimony. He says he was told that Borland had testified behind closed doors about a classified UAP program with strange code names. Project Rubik's Cube, he says. He was told Borland had described a pyramid-shaped non-human power source and even some kind of symbol, a hieroglyph, connected to it. And then Corbell makes his most serious allegation. He says that some of what the official told him was a lie. Specifically, he was told that Borland had drawn a fourth drawing of a sensor system, something Borland would have no way of knowing about. And Corbell's claim is that this lie had a purpose, that it was designed to catch Borland out, to manufacture a basis to accuse him of espionage or even treason, crimes that can carry a life sentence or worse. In other words, Corbell is alleging that an arm of the intelligence community tried to fabricate a case to destroy a whistleblower. Now that's pretty heavy. So let's tier it properly, because this is exactly what we want to do in the channel to keep our credibility. Tier 1, the bits are documented. Borland testified to the Inspector General and the Pentagon's UAP office. That's real, and he himself in his public testimony said that if he had said the wrong word, he could technically be charged with espionage, which carries a death penalty. So the fear is real, and the fear is on the record. Tier 2 and Tier 3, which is everything else. Project Rubik's Cube as a real classified program, the pyramid power source, the hieroglyph, and above all, the claim that an official deliberately lied to manufacture a treason case. All of that rests entirely on Corbell's account of a private conversation that we cannot see or verify. Now, I'm definitely not calling him a liar, but I am telling you, hopefully clearly, there is no public document, no second source, no piece of evidence in front of us that can confirm any of it. It's a huge allegation, and it lives for now in the speculative tier. We are definitely going to take it seriously, and although we can't take it as proven, we will note it and file it. There is one part of this, though, where Corbell describes his own conduct in a way that's worth pointing out, because it tells you how careful or how theatrical the man is, depending on how you read it. He says that before he ever said the words Project Rubik's Cube out loud on stage at a UFO festival, he phoned a lawyer, a man he describes as the first person to hold the Intelligence Community Inspector General job, and asked whether he was even allowed to repeat it. And the answer, as Corbell tells it, was that as a journalist, if an official said it to him, the legal exposure is on the official, not on the journalist. So he said it on stage. Then he turned to Borland, sitting right there, and asked him point blank whether he'd ever testify about a program called Project Rubik's Cube. Borland's answer, at least by Corbell's own account, was perfect. He said he could neither confirm nor deny it, that he wasn't in a secure setting, and that if Congress wanted him to answer, they should grant him proper whistleblower protection, and he would. He didn't take the bait. Now, all that is Corbell's account of a public moment, so the event is more verifiable than the secret claims behind it, but the substance, the existence of the program, still has to sit in Tier 3. What it shows is the game being played right out in the open. A journalist surfacing a code name and a witness refusing to confirm it without protection, all while a whole audience watches it. And there's one more thread Corbell pulls that's worth a mention, because it's the kind of small absurdity that sticks. He says he was told that one of Borland's drawings was a symbol almost like a hieroglyph, and that this particular drawing was classified. So he asked the obvious question, why on earth would you classify a symbol? It's just a shape someone scribbled from memory. What is there to protect? His implication is that the symbol must connect to something real, something physical, for anyone to bother locking it away. Now I know that's a leap. It could be classified for all sorts of dull bureaucratic reasons, and we have no way really to check, so it annoyingly again has to go into Tier 3. But it's a good example of how Corbell thinks. He's always tugging at the loose thread, always asking why the secrecy is shaped the way it is, because sometimes the shape of what they hide tells you more than the thing itself. And one more claim that we've got to handle again with a little bit of care. Borland has said publicly that he believes someone tampered with his car, that the brake lines were cut in what he describes as an attempt on his life made to look like an accident. We've heard this story before. I'll tell you the honest state of that and then move on, because it deserves gravity but not sensationalism. There is, as far as the public record shows, no police report confirming the brake lines were cut. If a crime like that had been documented, you'd expect an investigation. So that claim, as serious and frightening as it is, sits in Tier 3. His sincere belief with no public evidence behind it. I don't want to dwell on it, and I'd ask you not to spread it as fact, because a thing like that deserves serious proof. But we all know that these things get magically lost, edited, and even deleted. But for now, let's move to the second man, and to my mind, the most interesting one. Matthew Brown. And again, let's plant our feet on the documented first. Tier 1. Matthew Brown is a real former national security analyst who worked across the Defence and State Departments. He had authored a real document. It's called the Immaculate Constellation Report. It's around 11 pages long, the product of roughly 4 years of work, and it was genuinely submitted to Congress. That's all happened. That happened on the record. The reports exist. But what does Brown claim? He says that doing routine work on shared government servers, he stumbled on files for a program he'd never heard of, one that on paper didn't officially exist. He came to believe it was an unacknowledged special access program, the blackest kind of black program. And he describes Immaculate Constellation as a kind of parent program sitting over other constellations of smaller secret black programs, using advanced system to scan classified servers, automatically find imagery or unexplained craft, and quietly pull it into a hidden archive before it could spread. In plain terms, he's describing a machine whose job it is to hoover up the best UAP evidence inside the government and lock it all away. And the way he found it is almost mundane, which is the part of it that makes it hit a little bit harder. By his account, the material was simply misfiled, sitting on a shared server where it shouldn't have been, and at first he thought he was looking at a war game simulation, a training exercise, not something that was real. He says it even had imagery connected to another well-known figure in this world on it, which is what caught his eye. He calls this the kind of accidental exposure, a spillage, where you see something you've never cleared to see. And the moment he realised what it might be, he flagged it up in the chain. And that's the detail that matters. Now here is the crucial tier 1 fact that keeps us honest, and we're not going to skip it. The Pentagon denies that such program exists. So we have a real report by a real analyst submitted to real lawmakers describing a program the Pentagon says is not real. Now both of these are documented facts and they sit in direct opposition. That's the tension in this story. So let's tier it again. Brown wrote the report and submitted it tier 1. The program he described actually exists. That's probably tier 2, maybe tier 3. But it rests on his account that the Pentagon denies. And that specific image he says he saw, the exotic shape, the high quality footage, tier 3, it's been described, not shown. But here's what struck me about Brown and why Corbells clearly respects him. He did it by the book. This is the opposite of a leaker. Corbell describes how when Brown found the materials, his first move was to go to his superiors and flag them. He said that he'd seen something he probably shouldn't have. He tried to do everything in the right way through proper channels, getting pre-publication review from the State Department before speaking. So whatever you make of the claims, the process he followed, by at least Corbell's account, is exactly how you'd want a responsible insider to do it. And that has to matter, because it's much harder to dismiss a careful, by-the-book man than a reckless one. And there's also a stranger, more philosophical thread to Brown. So we'll flag it honestly and potentially put it in the most speculative part. He's spoken in almost mystical terms about a worldview where human beings might be a kind of resource for a non-human intelligence, about a reality itself being in some sense curated or managed by a hidden power. Now that's about as tier 3 as it gets, pure interpretation, his personal meaning. And to his credit, Corbell makes a sharp point about it. He says other people who saw the very same material did not come away with that worldview. But that worldview is something this channel seems to be cropping up and finding over and over again. Jason Giorgiani, for one, would say similar. We haven't covered David Icke. Some of the stuff he says is clearly nuts, but he would say something similar again. So for now, as ever, we've got to put these things in the tier 2 and tier 3 brackets. They are coming up over and over with some level of consistency, but as of yet, there is no definitive, verifiable, documented evidence. And then, although there's always the alleged smear, Corbell says that he was told a lie about how Brown was some sort of anti-Jewish bigot. And Corbell says he knew that was false, that Brown is part Jewish and has been at a Jewish wedding. Now that's Corbell's account, it's tier 2, but notice the shape of it, because it's the same shape every single time. A whistleblower comes forward and then a story appears that paints them as unstable, dangerous, hateful, or even criminal. Discredit the person and you never have to deal with what they say. And let's notice here, it's not just Brown. There's a thread here, and for me it's maybe the most powerful part of the whole conversation. It's the same shape repeating over and over again with completely different people. Grush, the decorated officer, told Congress he faced brutal reprisal, and Corbell says he was, in his own words, slimed, marginalised by governments and media at the same time. Borland describes the decades of obstruction. Brown describes a smear. Luis Elizondo, the man who once ran the Pentagon's own UAP effort and then resigned, has told Congress that secret programs run with no real oversight at all. These are not 5 random cranks. These are serious people with serious credentials who mostly don't even know each other, telling strikingly similar stories about what happened. Now the honest skeptic will jump in here, and maybe rightly, with the pattern warning we always know. If you go looking for a shape, you'll find one. People who come forward in any contested field tend to carry grievances, and grievance stories tend to rhyme. Now I think that is fair, but there's a point where consistency starts to carry the weight on its own. When independent witnesses who've never met describe the same specific tactics, blocked clearances, planted smears, manufactured accusations. At some point, you've got to start treating it as more than a coincidence, not as proof, but at least of a pattern worth taking seriously. And I'd put the existence of that pattern as strong tier 2. The claim that it's always centrally coordinated by one hand, well, that annoyingly has to stay in tier 3. But this brings us to the machine itself, and to the most concrete and most carefully handled part of the whole episode. Because for once, some of this is moved out of a podcast and onto a sworn Senate hearing. So here's the documented tier 1 spine. There was a real group inside the office of the Director of National Intelligence, set up under the current director, Tulsi Gabbard. It was called the Directors Initiative Group. It was a job to push forward declassification on a range of explosive topics, and it was wound down and dissolved in early 2026. This is all documented. In May 2026, a career CIA officer named James Erdman gave sworn written testimony to United States Senate Committee. In that testimony, he made stunning allegations. He said the CIA had illegally monitored the computers and phones of personnel working on these investigations, including their contact with whistleblowers. His words under oath to the Senate were that Americans were being spied on illegally while carrying out work directed by the President and the Director of National Intelligence. Now that's huge, but I've got to give you a little bit of honest nuance here too, because it is exactly what the excitable channels overreach with, and I don't want to do that just yet. The main thrust of Erdman's testimony was actually about the origins of COVID-19. That was his portfolio. His central allegation was that the CIA obstructed an investigation into where the pandemic came from. The illegal surveillance claim is real and serious, and it's under oath, but the headline of his testimony was not the little green men. So when this gets reported in UFO circles as a CIA agent confirming an operation against UAP whistleblowers, that could be a bit of a stretch. What he confirmed under oath is the illegal monitoring of these investigators and their whistleblower contacts. The leap from that to a dedicated, coordinated operation to entrap UFO witnesses, that leap is made by Corbell and Knapp, not by the sworn testimony itself. So let's tier this with some real discipline. Tier 1 documented. That group existed and was dissolved. A career CIA officer testified under oath to the Senate that the CIA illegally surveyed these investigators and their contacts with whistleblowers. That in itself is genuinely remarkable, and it is on the record. Tier 2, contested. Corbell and Knapp say they were the first point of contact for this group, that they personally connected whistleblowers like Borland, Brown and Grush to the investigators on a promise of protection. That's their account, very plausible, but their account. Then speculation 3, the big claim, that all of this adds up to a single deliberate operation run by rogue elements to co-opt 2 journalists, fabricate crimes against whistleblowers and entrap them. That's the interpretation. It connects real dots, but the lines drawn between these dots is Corbells, and it goes well beyond what anyone can actually prove. So let me give you the fullest version of this interpretation so you can wait for yourself. Because Corbell doesn't hold back, he claims this group ran an operation for around 9 months, and he believes its real mission was to co-opt him and Knapp to turn 2 trusted journalists into tools against the very whistleblowers they'd been protecting, to get them to help fabricate evidence, to push the witnesses into corners, to paint heroes as criminals. And the ultimate goal in his telling wasn't even about a single witness. It was to choke off Congress's appetite to keep holding hearings at all, cut the supply of credible witnesses, discredit the ones who get through, and the whole disclosure push loses a hell of a lot of fuel. Now that's a sweeping, ambitious allegation, and I want to be honest about its tier. It's a theory of motive built on top of contested evidence. It has to be tier 3. But I'll say this. It is at least a coherent theory. It does explain why you'd bother running an operation like that at all. Whether it is true is a completely different question from whether it makes sense. and only one of those can be answered from here. Corbell also makes a point claimed about how the agency responded when that CIA officer went public. He says the response wasn't a denial of spying, it was instead a complaint that the officer wasn't authorised to speak. Now, if that's accurate, it's the kind of non-denial that tells you something. But notice the characterisation of the response is Corbells. So I've got to hold it in tier 2 until you see the agency actually wording that for yourself. A non-denial is suggestive, it's not a confession. And this is the moment to bring us to the history, because it's a thing that stops me dismissing any of it. First, a concrete edge to all of this isn't only Corbell's word, because it has spilled into the open. There's been public reporting that the Justice Department was trying to locate UAP-related hardware, and the lawmakers, Congressman Burleson among them, were chasing different pieces of technology reportedly held in different places. Corbell says he openly helped agencies trying to hold other agencies accountable, trying to find where this material is supposed to be kept. Now, the deepest version of this, secret hangars full of recovered craft, is tier 3. But the documented part, that there's a genuine tug of war inside the government over access to whatever this is, with one arm reportedly hunting for what another arm is accused of hiding, well, that has surfaced into the public reporting. And it's now a strong tier 2. It tells you this fight isn't only happening in podcast studios where beers are on the table, it's happening in committee rooms on paper between branches of the same government. We made a whole episode about COINTELPRO, and it's not a theory, it's a documented program exposed by declassified files in which the FBI systematically went after Americans it found inconvenient. And the tactics are worth saying out loud, because of their exact same shape we keep seeing in this conversation. The FBI manufactured evidence. It planted false stories into the press to discredit people. It used a tactic called bad jacketing, falsely painting a loyal person as a snitch or a traitor to destroy them from within. It tried to drive people to breakdowns. It harassed, surveyed, and fabricated. All of it real, all of it proven after the fact, in black and white. So look at what Corbell's alleging and lay it next to that. Fabricated evidence, false stories painting whistleblowers as bigots or traitors, surveillance, harassment, attempt to manufacture criminal cases. It's the same playbook, line for frickin' line. And look at how neatly the specifics rhyme. Bad jacketing was the FBI tactic of falsely branding a loyal person a traitor to ruin them from the inside. Corbell alleges Brown was falsely branded a bigot and Borland was set up to look like he'd committed espionage. Same move, different decade. The planting of false press stories has a name too, and a documented history, because we've also covered Operation Mockingbird, the CIA's old web of relationships with friendly journalists. They quietly feed of stories, the shaping of what the public got to read. I raised it because it's the exact mechanism Corbell keeps circling. When he talks about the press being used as a weapon, about journalists being cooperative, he is not describing something unprecedented or paranoid. He's describing something with a long, documented past. The tools in his allegations are not invented, they are inherited. Now, that doesn't prove the playbook was run on Borland or Brown. So we've got to be clear about that, because it's an easy mistake to make. The fact that the state has done a thing before doesn't prove that it's doing it again. That's a logical trap, and we can't fall into it. But it obviously is important. It moves these allegations out of the realm of unthinkable. When a skeptic says the government would never fabricate a case to make an innocent whistleblower guilty, the honest answer is, with respect, it will, it has. It's documented. So we don't get to use that's unthinkable as reason to dismiss the claims. It's ridiculous. We have to actually weigh them, and weigh them honestly. They are serious, they are plausible, but they are not yet proven. So tier 2 and tier 3 sitting on a very real tier 1 historical foundation. And here's something that I genuinely appreciated, because it's the heart of how we do things on this channel, and it came from the two of them directly. In the middle of all this, the two both called for the need for extreme, epistemic humility, a fancy phrase for a simple idea. Don't snap anything to grid. Don't take a single juicy claim and lock it into place as fact just because it's exciting and it fits. Wait for corroboration, and crucially, they warn each other that even official-looking material can be a trap, that people believe things precisely because they are shown them in an official capacity, when the official stamp itself is the lie. Corbell is very blunt about it. He says some of what he gets handed to people in this world is deliberate disinformation, that someone has, in his belief, lied with their hand raised in front of Congress. So even sworn testimony, even classified documents, even the thing that looks the most authoritative can be planted. Now let's try and sit with that and what that means for everything else. It means the work is never quite finished, even on tier 1. It means a thing can look documented and still be fabricated. That's not a reason to give up and believe nothing is real. It's a reason to hold everything a little more loosely, to keep asking who benefits, and to never mistake a confident source for a verified fact. The man at the centre of this story, in his own words, is warning you to be careful with men at the centre of the story like this. I kind of find that strangely reassuring. But before the counter-narrative, there's one idea running under all of this that's definitely worth surfacing, because it reframes the motive. Corbell says that every time he and Knapp got anywhere near the top of this world, the message was the same. Don't kick a sleeping dog. He says that even the insiders who clearly believe that the phenomenon is real often don't think the public should be told. There's a phrase that floats around this subject, protective programming. The idea that the secrecy isn't only about hoarding technology, it's about sincere belief, right or wrong, that the truth would be too destabilizing for ordinary people to handle. Now, I find that idea generally chilling, whichever way it cuts, because if it's true, then the people running these alleged operations might not even see themselves as villains. They might see themselves as the good guy, even the guardians protecting a public that they're quietly deciding can't cope. And that historically is exactly the kind of mindset that justifies the worst abuses. The man who fabricates evidence to stop disclosure in his own head could believe he's a hero. Now that's a tier 3 claim as motive, but it's a tier 1 truth about human nature. So let's go to the counter narrative. On this episode, the skeptic has some genuinely strong cards. Let's play them fairly and not as a token. First, as we said earlier, the Pentagon flatly denies Immaculate Constellation exists. That's not nothing. That's the institution at the centre of this claim saying on the record the program is not real. A skeptic is entitled to weigh that heavily. Second, the CIA testimony was about COVID, not craft. The most concrete, sworn, documented thing in the entire episode is at its core a pandemic origin story that got partially adopted into the UFO narrative. A careful skeptic will say fairly that you can't treat them as confirmation of a UFO entrapment operation. Thirdly, a gentler explanation for a lot of this, and it deserves a hearing. It's sometimes called the Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by incompetence. Bureaucracies are slow, careless and cruel by accident. All of the time. A clearance that gets stuck for years, a dismissive supervisor, a botched investigation. These can be the work of a vast, dumb machine rather than a sinister spot. Not every broken career is a conspiracy. Some of it is just the system being the system. It is something I have arguments with people about all the time. In not just UFO stuff, in general government and politics. The incompetence can often seem that bad, you feel like it can't be accidental. There has to be an ulterior sinister motive. Now, personally, I do see some of that. But whenever I want to bring my scientific hat on, you do have to accept that governments can be exceptionally useless and big machines take a long time to turn direction. And fourth, the pattern problem. We talked about it last time with the dead witnesses, and it applies here too. Humans are pattern-finding animals. Line up enough careers and enough misfortune, and you will always see a shape, whether or not anyone drew it on purpose. And lastly, a nuance the skeptic and the careful believer should both hold on to. Even the CIA's officer's own sworn account frames the wrongdoing as rogue, bad actors, a faction abusing access, not official, sanctioned, top-down national policy. And that distinction matters enormously because there's a world of difference between deliberate government conspiracy to crush disclosure and a handful of unaccountable people running amok inside a system that failed to stop them. Corbell himself leans towards the rogue reading. He says he doesn't think there's some grand master plan, that everything's been provoked and forced into the open inch by painful inch. And honestly, that's both a more honest and maybe a more settling on picture than a tidy cabal. A tidy cabal you can name, expose and dismantle. Rogue actors inside a fog of secrecy, with no one truly in charge and no one truly accountable, that's a much harder thing to identify and fix. That's a strong case, and I won't pretend otherwise, but in fairness to the other side, here's the counter to it. The skeptics have to explain why a career CIA officer would risk everything to testify under oath to illegal surveillance if none of it was real. They have to explain the documented reprisals that multiple whistleblowers, not one, describe in almost identical terms, and they have to reckon with the fact that their "they'd never do it" defense is historically false. So once again, we land in the uncomfortable middle. Not a proven conspiracy, not an innocent coincidence. A serious, patterned set of allegations resting on real history, but still waiting for the final proof. So where does part 2 leave us on the scoreboard? Tier 1 is the documented flaw. It's bigger and darker than we may have guessed. Borland testified under oath to an encounter and to a decade of a broken career. Brown wrote and submitted a real report to Congress, which the Pentagon denies. A CIA officer testified under oath to an illegal surveillance of these investigations and their whistleblower contacts. And COINTELPRO proves that the discredit and fabricate playbook is real. All of that is very solid. Tier 2, the contested middle ground. Well, let's hold the journalist's account for being used as the first contacts, the claim of deliberate reprisal, the alleged smear of Brown. And the speculative ceiling holds the heaviest stuff. Project Rubik's Cube, the fabricated treason case, the pyramid power source, the single coordinated operation tying it all together, the attempt on Borland's life. None of it is disproven, but none of it is verifiable. So here's my honest reaction, the same one I keep landing on. The reason this is so hard to just wash away isn't necessarily the wild stuff at the top, it's the flaw underneath it, because the flaw in this episode includes a real program of documented government dirty tricks, a real CIA officer testifying under oath to real illegal spying. You don't have to believe a word about the pyramids and triangles to find that one genuinely disturbing. The machinery of secrecy and retaliation is absolutely real. What's unproven is whether it was pointed deliberately at these specific men. That's the open question, and it clearly is the most serious. We went in open-minded, and we kept the labels honest. And look what we're left with. Not a tidy conspiracy you can swallow as a whole, but not a pile of nonsense you can laugh at. A real, documented capacity for exactly this kind of abuse aimed at people we can't yet prove were targeted. Now, that's not a satisfying answer, but it's the closest one I can get to the truth. And maybe there's a real takeaway from the entrapment story. You don't need to resolve the UFO question at all to be disturbed by it. Strip away the triangles and the pyramids out entirely, and you're still left with sworn testimony of illegal spying, a documented history of the state fabricating cases against its own citizens, and a row of credible people whose careers collapsed the moment they spoke out. There's a phrase for what that does. Even if every single UFO claim turned out to be false, a chilling effect. Every potential whistleblower who sees what allegedly happened to Borland, to Brown, to Grush, learns a quiet lesson. Keep your head down and don't talk. And if the goal of an operation like that, the one Corbell describes, was ever to make the next person think twice before coming forward, then whether or not a single craft is real, you could argue it's working. So what would actually move these claims up a tier? And it's worth saying that plainly because it keeps us honest about what we're waiting for. For the entrapment, it would need to be documented. There needs to be documents, the actual record of what the officials said, the internal communications, the fabricated drawing itself, if it exists. For Immaculate Constellation, it would be the program confirmed by someone other than the man who reported it, or the imagery he described shown rather than surmised. For the surveillance, the Inspector General review that reportedly underway could either substantiate or sink it. None of that is impossible. Some of it may even come. And that's the right posture here. Not belief, not dismissal, but a clear list of what evidence would change your mind. If you can't say that, how can you ever decide if a claim is real if the tiers need to be changed? You're not really thinking about it. You're just rooting for one side. In the final part, we're going to go all the way up to the biggest claim of the lot. Not what is done to individual whistleblowers, but what Corbell says is being done to all of us. The narrative war, the honey trap, the alleged effort, in his own words, not to stop the UFO story, but to shape it. That's what we're going to do in our next episode. But for now, you tell me, of everything in this part, what climbs a tier for you? Does the COINTELPRO precedent change how you weigh the entrapment claims? Or where's the line between a sinister plot and a stupid system? As ever, if we've misidentified or misinformed, please let us know in the comments. Let me know where you sit on this. This is a really, really interesting situation, both with the government deliberately fabricating and how far we can believe official testimony. I'm sure you guys do, want to see the craft. Give me something my own eyes can see and process. Let the brilliant humans in our society do their tests, carry out whatever they need to, all experimentation, to decipher this. If I go back to earlier in this episode and we talked about how some of these government officials see themselves as the heroes, not the villains, I really see the logic in that. I think some of this stuff is so unsettling and so scary. Maybe 8 billion people can't know it, can't understand it, and more importantly, should not have access to it. Does that mean that it all has to be secrecy? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you in the final part of this first reaction series. Thank you so much for listening.